All right, welcome to the Armchair Commanders podcast. My name is John,
And I'm Jack.
and this week we are joined by a special guest, Greg. And this week, by his request, we are doing the classic submarine film Run Silent, Run Deep. Greg, if you want to say hi and tell the people a little bit about yourself, go on ahead.
Sure. My name is Greg. I am a museum professional. I've been working in the museum field of historic ships for about a decade at this point. I am currently employed by the Independence Seaport Museum in Philadelphia, and I oversee the caretaking of two historic vessels, the protected cruiser USS Olympia and the Baleo-class submarine USS Bakuna.
Nice. It's great to have you with us. So, kind of starting off, how'd you, how does one get a job looking after old naval ships? Like
A
that
lot
doesn't.
of luck.
I was going to say that doesn't seem like something you can just like put in an application like McDonald's or something.
No, and the museum field in general is like the way people fall into it is different for everyone. The way I kind of fell into it was like I graduated from University of Maryland, Baltimore County, way back in 2012, with a degree in history. And coming out of college, I was trying to figure out what I actually wanted to do with that degree in history. Most people do academics. So museum work is one opportunity. Um, Lots of historians go on to become lawyers, that sort of thing. I had started work on a master's degree in history to kind of buff my higher ability a little bit. And during that process, I was able to intern at the Fire Museum of Maryland, and that was kind of my first museum experience. And that kind of got me thinking, okay, this is something that I enjoy and something that I could see myself doing for a while. I fell into naval history just by sheer dint of when my grandfather passed away. The Navy showed up at his funeral and rendered him like full honors, like the flag over the casket, the gun salute, everything. That was the first time any of us knew he was in the Navy, like his grandchildren, because he never talked about it. For us, he was always the retired fireman. And so cleaning out his basement afterwards, I stumbled across his baseball cap and a cigar box full of old photographs, and I was able to do some research and find out that he was aboard a destroyer called the USS Brush. He was a boiler tech, and his ship was at Okinawa and Iwo Jima. And so, understanding that, I kind of knew why he didn't talk about his service, particularly those two battles. A lot of veterans do not talk about those battles because they were such horrible affairs to go through. And then in 2013, I got a job as a docent or a tour guide at Historic Ships in Baltimore. I was there for 3 years, and then I moved up to Philly in 2016 because they were looking specifically for somebody with submarine history knowledge. And so I fit the bill for them, and I came up here.
So once you start working for, is it considered the USS Olympia Museum, or is it like an overarching organization that oversees those ships?
The formal title of the organization is Independence Seaport Museum. And so if you like go to Google, that's usually the first thing that pops up if you search USS Olympia. So you won't find a USS Olympia museum. You'll have to search for the Independence Seaport Museum.
Okay. And how long have you been with that particular museum?
It'll be, let's see, 8 years in this coming March, I believe. So a little over 7.5.
Nice. I will say I also have a strong affinity for firefighting museums. I used to be a firefighter myself.
Did you?
Yes, I did, and let's see if I can actually show it off here. But I have
very nice,
an old school steam pump engine on my forearm. But yeah, so I know when we were originally talking, there's a couple of different movies that came to mind. What made you land on Run Silent, Run Deep?
It's a classic, first and foremost. Everyone knows Run Silent, Run Deep. It does a lot really well in terms of portraying submarine operations, but it also gets enough wrong where I think we could have a conversation, a good conversation about that. So that was kind of what drove my decision making.
All right. So, as we usually like to start, Jack, what'd you think?
I like this movie. In fact, this might be one of my top 10 favorite war movies now.
What
Is this
about
the
it?
first time you've seen it?
Yeah. First time in my life I've seen it.
Okay.
I think that's kind of a common thing, especially like nowadays, is like a lot of these older classic war movies. Everybody has heard of them or is familiar with the titles, but like I think the viewership of these older films is drastically going down as time passes.
Yeah, I think war movies in general, it's become something that you have to seek out, especially for us, even as a museum that deals with wartime issues. Um, we're starting to reach a point, and it's not just ISM. It's a lot of historic ships in general. We're starting to reach a point where we're losing the veterans, we're losing the immediate descendants of veterans, and so as a museum and how to think about longevity moving forward, we have to start thinking about how do we reach younger audiences who may not have those direct connections to the subject material we're presenting, and I think movies suffer from that as well.
It definitely is. And I think the other part of it too is that, this film definitely, you know, it is absolutely a product of its time. It very much follows the format of films from the 40s and 50s. And a lot of, you know, I think a lot of people today don't really relate to that older style of storytelling.
Yeah, it's a different cast of characters. Like even ignoring like Richardson and Bledsoe, like the tropes that they fill out, I don't think are tropes that connect to younger audiences, especially these days.
Yeah, I think a younger audience would have difficulty with this film because I think you would be like, "Oh, this is just chock full of tropes." But then you have to also realize that this is a film that literally created a lot of tropes,
Yeah.
especially within the like submarine movie genre.
Yeah, that's a good point. I didn't bother to think about
Yeah.
how many films were influenced by this film.
I look
That would
actually
actually
look
be something to go back and look at.
I actually looked this movie up on TV tropes, and it pretty much said what submarine tropes this movie didn't invent. It helped codify. And one of the one of the tropes that helped codify is literally called hot sub on sub action.
I gotta say, I did love the sub versus sub scenes in this movie. Um, it's not very often that I get that like edge of my seat feeling in a movie. Like I can get pretty immersed in a film, but I genuinely felt very stressed towards the end of this film as the American submarine and the Japanese submarine were about to cross each other, and you're like, oh, they're about to hit, and like that they're just filming two models sailing by each other, but you're like, I still felt myself tensing up because I'm like, is it going to happen?
Yeah. As a historian, I kind of look at those sorts of scenes from a different light because I know historically, during World War II, there was only ever one confirmed case of a submerged submarine shooting another submerged submarine and being successful. So whenever those scenes kind of pop up, I always kind of have to like put the historian in the back of my brain and be able to enjoy it kind of like just as a normal movie person.
And wasn't that the only case in history of what one sub sinking another?
I believe so. Yes, I because obviously there were none during the Cold War, so I believe so. Well,
Yeah,
I
and
mean,
I
hot sub on sub action doesn't happen quite as often as movies make you think it does.
yeah, that was at the back of my mind too. when I watched that. Like, there's only been one case, but if you guys want to go for number 2, go ahead.
Yeah.
I will say the other part of this, like, I kind of relate to you, Greg, in the fact that this film is definitely one of those films that if you really dig submarines and like read accounts from World War II and stuff like that, and are kind of in tune with the knowledge of that particular field, there's a lot of stuff that happens in this film. You're like, come on, like and I know this is kind of a silly thing to hit on, because it's not the point of it, but this film tries to draw a lot of suspense, and one way they could have done that is by having a torpedo hit a target and just like bounce off of it. But no, like every single torpedo in this film is straight and true and immediately blows up every ship that they try and
Yeah, especially because I'm pretty sure this film is supposed to take place in like early 43, and the Mark 14 issues were not ironed out by then. So that would have definitely been something to hit on. But that being said, like the whole issue with the Mark 43, or Mark 14 rather, it was that the Navy and the Bureau of Ordnance didn't want to admit that they had gotten something wrong. And so I wonder how much of that, especially with the technical advisor being a rear admiral, plays into that.
Well, that makes me think you could technically say there's been 2 submarine on submarine sinkings if you count the what was it, the USS Tang that sunk itself because the torpedo ran in a circle.
Yeah, and there's probably a couple more that we don't know about. I mean, with no survivors coming back to tell you what exactly happened, there might be a few more that had that issue, and we just don't know.
And that's another thing I wanted to bring up at the beginning of the movie when his ship
scene,
gets blown up and they're all just floating. Like, I don't think that happened.
No. A submarine being depth charged at depth is going to take everyone with it.
Yeah,
first and foremost,
they're
and
dead.
Secondly, like all the floating wood, like no, subdeck's made of teak precisely because they didn't float. Like teak didn't float because if a piece broke off, it wouldn't betray the position of the boat. And so having that scene, I chalked up to like movie necessity.
Yeah,
or historically speaking, nah.
If they all died there, the movie would be like 5 minutes long.
Yeah.
Well, how else are we?
We wouldn't have that sweet tale of revenge to follow the entire movie.
No, but that being said, they could have gotten around it by like referencing Tang, right? Tang did have survivors, the CO being one of them, because she was conducting a nighttime surface attack, and so when that torpedo hit the boat, he was on the bridge outside of the main pressure hull and got thrown into the water. So there is that way to get around it.
I also remember the Tang. That was more towards the end of the war, but they were operating in shallow enough water that basically like it was like the tail end of the ship sunk into the seabed, and the very front of the ship was like maybe 10 to 20 feet underneath the surface of the water. And it was, I believe it was one of the first times that, God, I hope I'm saying this right, the Mumsen lungs were used successfully.
The Tang sank in about 180 feet of water, and fleet boats are a little over 300 feet long. So yeah, her bow was actually still sticking above the water initially. The surviving crew in the forward end of the boat actually bottomed her out, so they deliberately flooded the forward ballast tanks to level her out so they could use the escape trunk in the forward torpedo room. I don't remember if the Momsen lung was actually used in that instance or not. The forward escape trunk is only good for 100 feet of water or less, and so they were pushing twice the limit. The numbers are skipping me, but I think something like 13 guys tried to escape, only 5 made it to the surface. But it was one of the only times that we know that the forward escape trunk was used to get guys out of a stricken boat.
I feel like that would have made, like, using the Tang would have made for a great intro to this film.
Yeah, it would have set it up, at least from my historian's perspective, to be a little bit more believable in that case, at least.
But I will say, if it wasn't for our Japanese destroyer, we wouldn't have our, you know, Moby Dick inspired captain's obsession story to happen. So
That's true, but that also brings me to another piece that I have an issue with. Richardson very clearly had some PTSD. There is no way he would ever see command ever again, let alone convince a board of admirals to give him a boat.
that's also got to look a little suspicious. It's like, what do you mean you're the only one from your submarine that's alive?
Well, I think there was some discontinuity in the film regarding that, because the opening scene had multiple survivors. It showed multiple people put into debris, but then later on, he says that he's the only survivor, or I think Bledsoe accuses him of being the only survivor. So there was some discontinuity there, but again, 50s film, we'll chalk it up to that.
See, it was a long float back to Pearl Harbor, and they only had so much food.
Yeah. Now you're getting into Indianapolis territory.
The guy got hungry. So did the Sharks. But I think, Jack, if I'm not mistaken, this is our first film that we've reviewed that has Clark Gable in it.
Damn, you're right.
Which I'm shocked that we've made it this far, given what kind of a huge star he was in the 40s and 50s.
Yeah, man.
What'd you think of his performance in this film?
Pretty good. I think we picked the right Clark Gable movie to start Clark Gable.
I do remember seeing an article about how there's quite a few World War II veterans who were upset by him getting chosen to portray this role, because at the time that this film was done, he was like 55, 60 years old or something like that. And I think the average age of a submarine captain was like 30.
Yeah, that sounds about right. 30, 35 would have been your average commanding officer.
But I mean, at least having Clark Gable is more, it seems more legit than having John Wayne do a bunch of different roles, because, you know, Clark Gable actually served in World War II, so at least he has that going for him.
Well, we could do Operation Pacific next time if we want to talk John Wayne.
We just, our last film we reviewed was a John Wayne film, and we weren't too terribly kind to him. But I don't think I've heard of Operation Pacific. I'm guessing that's another like naval film.
Operation Pacific, yeah, it's another World War II submarine film. I honestly forget the overall premise, but John Wayne is the commanding officer of USS Thunderfish, and they go and do some stuff. The one scene that I remember that film is there's a portrayal of a Q ship in that film where they think it's a merchant vessel, and they're gonna sink it with deck guns, and they get close enough, and all of a sudden the Q ship reveals that it also has deck guns and shoots back at the submarine.
Haha, charade you are.
Indeed.
So, Greg, who was your favorite character in this film?
I don't remember his name, and he dies. He's the young guy that bets on Area 7.
Oh yeah, that guy.
He's just like the quintessential, like, most, like, the reality of it is most of these submarine crews are 18, 19, 20-year-old kids who are young and dumb and just want some kind of adventure. And he is the quintessential portrayal of that, plus also the added on of like sailor superstition. Like, that whole aspect of the film I really enjoyed.
He kind of reminded me of Butters from South Park.
I was just about to say that.
Yeah.
Oh, geez, fellas.
Well, I bet on
Area
naivety
to him. If only I had been born on the 8th.
Oh, jeez, I wish I was born on the 8th.
All right, kid, we forgive you. You can give us our money back. Oh, geez, guys, my conscience got to me. I threw all the money overboard. What?
Man, like, after he won that scene, I even said to myself, guess who's getting robbed tonight?
Yeah.
They know where he sleeps.
They know where he sleeps and works.
Yes. My personal favorite was it's hard to hate Don Rickles, especially seeing as he's almost his own trope in every film.
Yeah, he's a good one.
My favorite moment with him is when Clark Gable, after he's injured, he passes out for a few minutes and he wakes up in one of the cots, and he has the ship's medic or the ship's doctor looking at him, and there's Don Rickles right behind him, and he's like, "Here, have a drink of this, it'll help you." And he's like, "What is it?" He's like, "It's medicine, 100 proof."
The question that Richardson should have asked was, is it depth charge rations or is it torpedo juice?
Yes, good old torpedo juice. Would you like to, Jack? Have you ever heard of torpedo juice?
I've heard of it.
Greg, could you elaborate?
I can, yes. So the Mark 14s were steam-driven torpedoes, but the fuel source they used was a blend of methanol and ethanol alcohol.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Yeah. So it was not uncommon for submariners to use the alcohol in the torpedoes to get themselves rowdy, because by this point in time, the U.S. Navy doesn't really carry alcohol aboard its ships. And so a submariner's screwdriver would be torpedo fuel and tang powder mixed together. That would be a common, yeah.
Good old tang.
That's why the torpedoes kept missing.
Yeah, they didn't have enough fuel.
Forward torpedo room report.
What do you want?
By the Cold War, the Navy had started dyeing the torpedo alcohol pink, so that if someone had it in a glass, the officer would know what it was, and they couldn't lie about it.
Jesus.
It's like putting a dye pack in a bundle of money.
Yeah.
Jack, who is your favorite character in this film?
I think it was Butters as well.
Good old Butters. I forget. Did Butters die in this film? Because
yeah, he got crushed by a torpedo.
Ah, yeah. Okay. I couldn't remember if he was one of the ones that got killed.
Yeah, he was.
Oh, hamburgers.
Superstition karma got caught up to him.
Yeah. What was the superstition that he crossed? Don't bet on 7 or something.
Yeah, so the area that they were assigned to, Area 7, was set up to be, because of the destroyer, it's bad luck to go into that area. And so because he bet on that they would be assigned to that area, he kind of invited that bad luck to the boat. That caught up to him, so to speak.
What a dummy. I mean, personally, I think throwing the money overboard out of guilt was the bad luck move more so than that. But what do I know?
Especially now that his family's going to have to pay for a funeral.
Yeah, idiot.
I mean, if I remember correctly, they shot him out of a torpedo to make the Japanese think they were sunk.
Yeah,
that's right, they did.
And then Tokyo Rose gave him a shout out on their favorite radio show.
That was something I actually enjoyed greatly in this film, was the appearance of Tokyo Rose, and how she is a constant presence in the film because they're always listening to her. And I did enjoy that, because it's not something that's touched on in films very often. And genuinely, that is probably one of the few forms of entertainment that they would have had at this time, is listening to Tokyo Rose. So I did like hearing her little appearance.
Yeah, it was definitely a nice touch, kind of a nice nod
Hmm.
to kind of like the Japanese kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Like the attempt on American morale with her. You know, reading off the names of the dead, making them think about what they've done, and you know, kind of gaslighting them in a way. Oh, you did this because you came out here. So it's an aspect of the war that, yeah, that isn't really talked a whole lot about.
I also like the fact that it not only was it a nod to their day-to-day life, but it actually played an actual part in the story of this movie where, you know, Tokyo Rose comes on to the radio and says, you know, I've what was Nurkin? Was that how they said it? The submarine
Nurkin,
name?
yeah.
The Nurka, yeah, the boat's name was
Nurka,
the Nurka.
Nurkin.
Yeah. So they're like, to the families of the crew of the Nurka, they're not coming home. And then they list off the names of the officers, and uh, our main character, he's like, wait, how did they know our name? And then he does his little Sherlock Holmes sleuthing thing, and he's like, by God, they actually do think we're sunk. But that's how they find out that like the trash wasn't being disposed of properly, which I feel like they would have known how to have done it by this point in the war, but for the sake of the story, it was
Yeah,
nice.
especially like the initial issue with the trash being thrown overboard, and they almost lose a guy. No one would be allowed topside without the express permission of the officer of the deck, because he's the one that has to keep a head count for everyone. So to have someone just leave the pressure hull and throw trash overboard without telling anybody is not realistic. Um, I'm going to caveat this by saying both museum subs that I've worked on have been modernized, but both of them had garbage disposal units, which are mini torpedo tubes that go out the bottom of the boat. You load the trash into those into a weighted bag and then fire it out the bottom of the boat, so no one has to go topside. I don't know when those would have been introduced into the fleet. So early war boats might not have had it, but both boats that I have worked on as a museum professional have had those.
I'm curious. Like I do understand the whole like following the breadcrumb theory here in this movie, but also maybe the oceans were cleaner in 1943. But I just think about like you ever watch any kind of environmental video today about like, oh, we have to clean up the oceans and whatnot. Like the oceans are literally filled with so much garbage that it makes you wonder like how effective of a tracing tool that would be.
I suppose the theory behind that, if it's floating, it's relatively recent.
Hmm.
But then again, you don't know until you pick it up and look into it. I suppose that's the whole
Right.
that's the whole intelligence bit. There's somebody who's paid to look at somebody else's trash.
So, Jack, what was your favorite scene in this movie?
I liked it when they blew up the ships, and that aha
Here,
moment. That aha moment they had when they found out it was another sub that sank the other ship. Which you think they would have detected that, but
meh, suspense and whatnot. I will say the first time we see a ship get blown up and we have it through like the periscope view, like that was a real like chest thumping moment. Where like, yeah, that was kick ass.
America.
And then when they go to sink another ship, it's almost just like a shot for shot remaking your. I was like, oh,
Aww.
Yeah,
Gotta
I
save
didn't
money.
understand uh, Richardson's obsession with the down the throat shot. Like that's the hardest shot to pull off. Like if you're a submarine, that's not the position you want to be in to begin with to fire a torpedo. But I guess he felt that the Akakazi wouldn't be lured by anything else.
how about you, Greg? What was your favorite scene in this film?
I honestly like the scene where the other officers call Bledsoe into the wardroom to try to get him to take over command, and Bledsoe kind of denies them because Bledsoe could have easily been set up as the mutineer, and that was the moment in the movie where I realized that I could actually root for this guy.
Where he was just sticking to his guns and he's like, "Everybody, shut up."
Yeah, where they're all coming in. We've been looking at the Navy regulations. You can take over, and he goes, "No, this boat has one captain, and you will all follow. We'll follow him to the bottom of the ocean if that's where he wants to go."
Also leads to another great Rickles moment where he calls one of the officers an ass.
Gosh, Mr. Cartwright, words just don't work for me anymore. Because he punches him.
My other favorite scene was when they first get the word to go to the Bungo Straits, and it just goes down the grapevine. Bungo Straits, Bungo Straits. I paused the movie at that time to call John and said, "Bungo Straits."
I also like, I found this. Speaking of the whole Bungo Straits thing, one, that's a hilarious name for a sea passage. But secondly, I also appreciated that, like, this film is not that far removed from World War II. We're maybe, what, like a decade out? So the feelings are still fresh. And with the exception of the little carving of Bungo Pete, which is like a super over the top caricature, like the way that the Japanese are portrayed in this film is actually like, at least from my perspective, it seemed very reasonable and not totally disrespectful, which I feel is a line that they could have very easily crossed with how close a proximity to the end of the war they were.
Yeah, especially for this time period, that was the thought that I had as well. Is this movie was not nearly as racist as it could have been.
Like there are multiple scenes where the Japanese sailors are shown like they have like perfect uniforms. They act very serious and very professional, and like none of them are that like over the top caricatures that we see in a lot of other films in this time period. And I'm like, this is I was generally surprised. I'm like, this is an interesting choice for them for the time.
Yeah, and I like that it didn't even bother translating the Japanese words and phrases. You just had to infer it yourself.
Yeah, I was wondering if the version I was watching didn't have subtitles or if they were somewhere else. But I'm glad that it seems like there weren't subtitles across the board. But at the same time, like you didn't really need them. Like you kind of got the gist of what was being said based on their acting performances, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and you still like, especially like on the Japanese submarine, you could still feel the like tenseness and the like. You could still gather, you could gather what's going on without the explicit like knowing what they're saying.
Yeah, that scene. It's very much. Makes me think of like the old western like standoffs, like when they're having a shootout and the tension that builds before one of them draws. It's almost that same kind of tension where you've got the two subs and they're waiting to see who makes noise first.
Or crash into each other.
Yeah, or I think bottom out too, because I think Bledsoe mentioned that they were slowly sinking. If they didn't put the motors back on, they would just kind of bottom out.
Hmm. I did have a question for you. When you said bottom out, it made me think of one particular scene, which was right after one of the scenes where they get depth charged. One of the hatches is damaged and water starts pouring in. And when I saw that, I immediately thought to myself, I'm like, wouldn't a damaged hatch just be like immediately catastrophic?
It would largely depend on the depth you're at, Shallower depths, maybe not immediately. It would certainly mean more water is getting into the boat than what the movie portrayed. Um, the deeper you are, it becomes more of an issue because more water at that pressure is coming in. Later war boats had these things called depth charge claws or hooks, and there are these hooks welded on the inside of the hatch that fit into slots inside the trunk to prevent just that. Where if the hatch comes loose and the spring tries to open, those hooks will keep it in place. But yeah, having a hatch blown open like that is generally bad news.
Okay. So I wasn't overthinking it then because I was like, it the way that this movie portrayed it, you could tell that it was obviously a bad thing, but it was like, oh, we'll get it fixed. It's fine. We'll just tie it down with a rope. And I'm like, this doesn't seem like the ship should still be operating at this point.
Yeah, especially because to get the rope onto the hatch, you would have to climb up through the incoming water, and that's probably not going to happen. So it would have been a more severe situation than what the movie portrayed it as.
But I mean, there's a lot of things about this movie Submarine that isn't really accurate or doesn't really make sense. At least just from my own. I've only ever been on one World War II submarine before, and it's the I forgot the name of it. I think it's the Pampanito, the one that's in San Francisco.
Yeah, that's Pampanito. Yeah.
So I've been on that one, and being on that particular sub, like I always knew that they were small and kind of tight, confined spaces, but you really don't appreciate like how small a sub actually is until you're inside of one. And this film makes a lot of the spaces seem kind of luxurious, like the crew dining area in the submarine in this movie. I'm like, where did they find the space for this? Like, it looks like a full on like dining hall.
Yeah, I got the sense that a lot of the interior shots were definitely sets. They were pretty good sets overall, honestly. But if you, for someone like myself who has the background and the knowledge, you can definitely tell that they were sets. Externally, all of the external shots were USS Redfish. So they actually used a an actual naval diesel boat for the external shots. But I would say that probably about 90% of the internal shots were sets.
What was uh what was the biggest thing that kept kind of like bugging you in this film when it came to the submarine layout that they were portraying?
There were a few instances where they showed scenes in the forward battery, which is where Officer's Country is, and just the way that they had the layout for the doors to the different staterooms wasn't quite accurate. And so every time somebody would like pretend were supposedly coming in from let's say they were coming in from the aft end, but that was the forward end setup. There was some issues there that I kept noticing. Those That was actually the biggest thing for me. I think as far as the set goes, everything else was more or less believable.
I don't know about you guys, but the one part of the ship which was not a standard issue thing that I appreciated, or like it showed great continuity in the film in this one regard, was the poster of the pinup that they had in their dining section. And that, like, it was probably like three or four separate times in the film where the camera zooms in on this pinup as like some major action is happening, and like each crew member pats this picture of a pinup's butt as they go to whatever station they're going to. I thought that was like a great little like see, or what's the word, the
Seaman.
seaman, the kind of going to that superstitious side of of sailors, where it's like, okay, this is the ship's girl, so we're going to pat her on the butt before we go to work. Like,
Yeah, it's a good luck thing, right? It's also a morale thing. So like, the captain would have had every right to tell them to take it down, but he didn't because he understands the value that has for the crew is beyond what the pinup is in and of itself, right?
And who is he to stand in the way of superstition after seeing what it did to Seaman Butters?
Seaman Butters.
Well, he was almost taken out by Simon Butter's superstition. I guess technically you could say he was, just not as quickly.
Yeah, it was a slow release death for him. I got tired of. Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, you go ahead, Jack.
Oh, I got tired of that one thing where he was laid up in bed, and he kept fucking hearing that. We don't know what it means, Captain. We don't know what it means, Captain. We don't know what it. Fuck's sake.
I still don't know what it means.
So I understood what they were going for in those scenes. Like beyond the fact that like they're trying to give you the impression that he's like mentally chewing on this while he's unconscious. But what they were listening to in the film, it comes across as like Morse code, which is not correct. But I think what they were trying to get across was that they could hear the submarine, the Japanese submarine, the noise in the background. I'm just not sure that they chose the best noise to portray that noise, if that makes sense.
I don't know. I love Clark Gable in this film, but his like laid up in bed portion of the film was kind of meh for me. And I get the whole point of that is like, by God, the captain's obsession has been passed on to the new captain, and he can grow into his own little Captain Ahab, and a fully fledged sailor he is now. But the thing I didn't really understand is in this film, we start off with them hating each other, and they have such a tense relationship throughout the first portion of them being at sea, and realistically for no reason at all other than like him having his little like light bulb moment where he's like, oh, he's been practicing specifically for this really difficult torpedo shot. I trust him implicitly now, and I'm going to stick up for him, and I'm going to squash this rebellion. It just there was like a 180 in their relationship that just didn't make sense to me.
I think I chalked some of that up to just the respect that one would give a fellow officer in the Navy in the same position. Because Bledsoe, I mean, Bledsoe still makes his, not discomfort, his disagreement with Richardson known throughout most of the movie, even though he's kind of following in behind him. I think some of that is, well, if I was in Richardson's position, would I want a crew mutinying against me? No, because that also goes back to, well, if there's a dissatisfied crew, like then everyone's in danger, right? It goes back to that we're all in this together, because if the sub goes down, we're all going down. No one's getting out of this. And so we all need to kind of work together, even if that's chasing Captain Ahab's mad dream, or we all die.
I personally would not be keen on following Captain Ahab's mad dream of the Japanese destroyer.
It got Seaman Butters killed.
It did get Seaman Butters killed, and it got the Captain Ahab killed.
Yep.
Yeah.
He went down with the proverbial white whale.
I know it might have been a little over the top, but the fact that he just like died of an infection or perceived infection was really kind of lackluster. Like, I really wanted him, like, it would have been way cooler if Clark Gable was killed by like a torpedo just falling on his head. Just you could do the you could just do the Adam West Batman, like bonk. Like,
imagine if he took a page from Dr. Strangelove and rode in the torpedo that killed the ship.
I was just having that thought, actually.
I can't remember. Do we have Dr. Strangelove on our list?
It should be. Put it on the list.
I think it ought to be.
Yep. You have to have the full title if you're putting it on the list. Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb.
We should definitely get that on the list. I don't think I had it, but it might take a while to get around to it. But
it's either the scariest comedy or the funniest disaster movie.
So Greg, what was the the best part of this film, or what was the highlight of this film for you?
I think the end. I mean, you have the climax of they are actually successful in sinking the Akikaze. They are successful in figuring out, the Japanese sub secret, right? And so, even though Richardson ends up dying of an infection or a brain bleed or whatever he hit his head with, the movie is still a victory, and I think for me that's emblematic of what the subservice did as a whole during the war, right? So by the end of the war, the submarine service had lost 52 boats, over 3,500 men, which accounted for a 22% casualty rate, which was the highest of any American armed service during the war. So there was a lot of sacrifice that went into submarines and the victory that they helped achieve. To juxtapose that, submarine service at the time was 2% of the Navy's overall strength. They were responsible by the end of the war for sinking 55% of all Japanese shipping. And so I think this yeah. So there's this sense of there's a lot of sacrifice, but the sacrifice was not in vain.
I get that. I appreciate that. Would you say that this film properly honors that sacrifice that the subservice did during World War II?
I think so. I think the movie isn't too silly. It doesn't take itself too seriously, obviously, but it's not over the top. As far as sub operations go, like the procedures, all of that, were pretty spot on, and I think it does portray what the goal of the submarine service at the time was and what it took to achieve that goal.
It wasn't a travesty like U-571.
No, God,
I hate that movie.
Well, if you ever want to come back, Greg, we can do that together. I'm sure we could have
we could tear it to shreds.
Yeah, we could have quite a conversation about that.
If you guys want to invite me back, I would love to come back. This has been fun.
All right.
You heard it, Jack. Next film, U-571.
Fuck you. Man, John's really been letting me have it recently. He's been taunting me with various shit movies that he's going to make me watch for this podcast.
We can watch. What's the one that I posted on Instagram that got your attention to begin with? The Soviet one. That one was awful.
Oh, was it? Oh God. Was it K-19 or was it?
No, it wasn't K-19. I'm going to blank on the movie now. It had the whole cast is a bunch of old white actors whose faces I recognize but names I can't think of, and they're all the stereotypical 2-bit action movie stars.
Yeah,
Ed somebody plays the CO. But yeah, that is we could do that movie and really tear that one to shreds because that was awful.
I can't remember what film you originally talked about that got my attention, but I'm glad we did this film because it's like we said at the beginning. This is literally the submarine film that created the submarine genre tropes. So it's a good one. God, what was I going to say? Now I'm blanking out. That's what I get for starting to drink at 11 a.m. on a Sunday. But speaking of drinks, what are you having to drink, Jack?
I am drinking Fanta's special 0 sugar, 0 caffeine, What the Fanta Halloween special soda.
That is
That
a
was
mouthful.
Yes. And
What does it taste like?
see, I had trouble placing it myself, so I cheated and looked it up, and the common consensus is that it's blood orange.
Okay, I guess that makes sense.
Halloween, yeah.
Yeah.
But the 0 caffeine, zero sugar thing is my favorite part. Tastes pretty good too, to boot.
I was going to give you crap for still drinking like a Halloween drink, but I literally went and got a trick or treat blast from Sonic last night, so I'm no better.
Well, I don't see very many Thanksgiving sodas.
Yeah, there's not a huge market for gravy flavored soda.
The video game store in my hometown before it closed down, God rest its soul, but they would stock corn flavored soda for one patron, for one guy. That would always go to, yeah, corn flavored soda, not corn syrup flavored soda, but soda flavored like corn. And they stocked it just for one guy that would show up to their Friday night magic.
Are you from Iowa by any chance?
No. Which makes this even more baffling.
No, I'm from Iowa. That's the problem.
Yeah, I'm from South Dakota. Our thing is beef, incest, and meth, not corn.
I don't recall incest being a thing in South Dakota. I missed that memo.
It's lower on the list of things. It's beef and meth, and then maybe incest. No, correction. It's beef, meth, racism, and then incest.
Ah, yes. How could we forget?
I guess once you hit the meth, everything else is ephemeral.
Yeah. Yeah, those are the two things we're known for.
See, in Philadelphia, was it cheesesteaks and fentanyl?
Something like that. Cheesesteaks and crime.
Riots after an Eagles game.
An Eagles game that they won.
Yeah, well, Phillies too. I live right next to the stadiums too, so that's whether they win or lose, I can't win.
I think my favorite Philadelphia fact is when they built their new stadium, it was the first stadium to ever have its own built-in jail.
Yeah, that's true.
God bless them.
I don't know
Brady.
I don't know if you are an Eagles fan or not, Greg. Whether do you do the football thing much at all, or?
I do. I am a sports fan, but I'm a Baltimore sports fan. I grew up just north of Baltimore City, so I am a Ravens and Orioles fan. So the Eagles, I couldn't care less.
All right, cool. Because I was like, I have to hate the Eagles by proxy because one of their tight ends his name's Dallas Goedert. He grew up in Britain, South Dakota, and went to South Dakota State University. Me and Jack went to University of South Dakota, so we already had a distaste for him because he went to our rival school. But he actually dated my wife's best friend, and when he found out he was going to get into the NFL, he became like a super massive tools and then got drafted to the Eagles. So since then it doesn't matter how good of a team it is. We just have to hate the Eagles on principle because of him.
Well, it sounds like he fits right in. I honestly couldn't care less about any of these Philly sports teams, but I hate them based on how much I hate their fan base. And so, like, Eagles and Phillies are pretty up there because, especially when they're winning, because having to drive through all that mess to get home from work every day, like, none of them know how to drive. None of them know how to use a crosswalk. And the Flyers fans are down there because there are no Flyers fans. So whenever there's a Flyers
It's
game, there's no traffic.
it's a shame because there's so many things in Philadelphia that I want to see. Like I want to see the USS Olympia. Um, I I think that's the coolest ship ever because it carried the unknown soldier back to the United States, and it's also the sister ship of the Maine. Like I think it would be the coolest thing in the world to get to check out that ship. But I also want to check out the tomb of the unknown American Revolutionary soldier that's in Philadelphia.
Mhm.
And I also wanted to check out the American Revolutionary. I believe the American Revolutionary War Museum is in Philly also.
Yes,
Oh,
it's a great museum. I've been there a
so
couple
yeah,
times.
there's tons of stuff there that I want to see, but I'm like, but then I have to go to Philadelphia. Like,
You do, but I think with as with any major city, the locals don't do the touristy things. So like if you go to the touristy areas where most of those things are located, you'll be fine. The one thing that I would advise against is if you come into the town and look for a cheesesteak, do not go to Pat's or Gino's.
okay,
Yeah, I heard Geno's are a bunch of assholes.
They're not the best. They have the gimmick because they're across the street from each other. They've been featured on Food Network a dozen times, and so everyone goes there. But they're not the best in the city. My preference is Campos, which is uh, right down the street from the museum. So they're pretty good, and they're never that busy. So
Yeah, yeah. I just want to go to Philly to see Gritty and have a cheesesteak.
I'm still trying to get Grady to come to the museum. If I can get Grady onto Olympia at some point, my career will be made.
Fuck yeah.
Gritty's the Flyers mascot, right?
Yeah,
Okay, so he's the one that does all the. He's like the mascot, right?
he is the mascot. He's the best thing about that team. He's arguably the best thing about the city.
He's probably if I remember correctly, he's probably like the best mascot, just period.
Yeah, I can't think of a
Yeah.
better one.
I'm trying to imagine him just like straddling one of the artillery pieces on the Olympia.
Yeah, he could do it. Or we have on the forward bridge, we have a set of brass footprints where it's not exactly where Dewey stood during Manila Bay, but it's like as close as you can get in the ship's current configuration. So having him be like right next to those two would be pretty great.
I see. I didn't know that. So there's actually a place on the ship that's specifically marked that is supposed to be where Admiral Dewey was.
Yeah, we have a set of brass footprints that are on the forward bridge next to the pilot house, which the ship has gone through several configurations over the course of her career. And the way she sits today, if you walk through her, you're seeing World War One Olympia. But the first group that had her as a museum back in the 50s wanted to interpret her as her Spanish American War configuration. And so externally, they did a lot of kind of removing certain pieces to get her back to that kind of silhouette with the turrets. So one of the most common questions we get these days is, can we go inside the turrets? And the answer is no, because the turrets are fake. The turrets that are on the ship now were installed after she became a museum. The Navy removed those turrets back in 1915 when the ship was still in service because they were just terrible weapons. But people
Really?
don't know that. Yeah.
Huh. It's a sham. It's all a sham.
Well, so as a museum, one of our goals is to fix what has been done and kind of restore her World War One silhouette. The turrets are slotted over platforms for open gun mounts, which is what she should have had by the end of her career. And we would like someday to be able to restore those platforms and put the 5-inch 51s that should be there back in place.
And if I'm not mistaken, the Olympia is still in the white fleet paint scheme, right?
Yes, yeah, she's still in her red, white, and buff parade colors.
I've always been a fan of that, but so I think it's or I didn't even get to you, Greg. What are you drinking today?
I am drinking a glass of apple cider from one of our local orchards.
It's very festive.
Yeah, well, you can have your pumpkin spice. My fall flavor is apple cider, and then once we get through November after Thanksgiving, I switch to peppermint.
Yeah. My favorite thing is to add a bit of cumin to some apple cider so I can have a cumin cider.
I don't think I've ever done that. I'll have to give that a try.
It's
Yeah,
quite
man.
good. I've tried it.
Once you cumin cider, you can't go back.
Yeah. Do you prefer your cider hot or cold?
Hot.
Hot.
Warm cider.
Warm cider. I think
I
I'm a cold guy. I'm a cold cider guy.
I can go either direction. I actually was test running a drink for our Thanksgiving celebrations. Um, what I'm doing is Thanksgiving mimosas, and instead of orange juice, it's going to be apple cider
Gravy.
with. No, Jack. No. It's going to be apple cider with the champagne, and then the glass is going to be rimmed with caramel.
Rimmed with stuffing.
Shut up.
All geniuses were considered madmen in their times. You can't run from me forever.
No. So that was my little experiment for Thanksgiving was Thanksgiving mimosas. But what I'm currently drinking, I always try and get a little I try to choose a drink that is kind of in line with whatever we're watching. So like last week we reviewed the movie The Horse Soldier, or I can't remember what we actually reviewed.
The Horse Soldiers.
That's the one that just came out. I don't know if Joy Noel is the next episode coming out prior to this.
Oh, never mind. You're talking chronologically.
Yeah. For our folks at home, the order we release episodes is not always the order in which we record them. But the most recent episode at the time of this recording that's currently available to listen to was The Horse Soldiers starring John Wayne, and I drank Horse Soldier whiskey. Today, because we're doing Run Silent, Run Deep, I wanted a more Navy-inspired drink, so I'm returning to my tried and true of Sailor Jerry's rum with Coke.
Next time you do a sub movie, you'll know to do the submarine screwdriver with alcohol and Tang, right?
Yeah, I'll have to do that next time. I'll just have to do like rubbing alcohol and Tang.
Yeah. Anything with coffee is also a guaranteed naval themed drink.
That was I really enjoy I think Sailor Jerry's is I enjoy it, but
yeah.
Also, it's a world famous tattoo artist that, many a sailor has gotten his tattoos or style of tattoos. And, he was a Navy man himself. So I figured it was fitting enough.
Yeah, for sure.
But I think it's about time we rate this film. And Greg, I don't know if you've reviewed many of our other episodes, but we usually like to do a 1 to 5 scale. We don't do stars because we think stars are boring. So we try and do 1 to 5 things that best represent this film. And for example, God, what have we done in the past, Jack?
Let's see. Exploding Wells.
Cups of coffee.
Cups of downstream from the horse's coffee.
Exploded carriers, etc., etc. So I am open to suggestions if you have anything in mind that you think best exemplifies this film.
Torpedoes?
1 to 5 torpedoes, Jack?
1 to 5 torpedoes.
All right. Jack, I'll let you start off with your rating.
I give this movie 4 torpedoes and then one that never fired because it's out of fuel because Greg drank it all.
That's we could go into a whole nother conversation about the dead torpedoes too, couldn't we?
Well, let's hear your rating, John.
I am going because this is literally the film that has set the tone for the submarine film genre. And also the fact I legitimately enjoyed this film. I thought it was good. It was entertaining. I didn't scroll my phone at all while watching this film. And it's different for the time that it's set in. Like I said, it's not too terribly racist for being a film made in the 50s. And, you know, it's entertaining enough that, you know, it's hard to accuse it of being full of tropes when it created the tropes. So, and the other fact is that Clark Gable does a terrific performance in this film. So I'm going to give it 5 fully functional torpedoes.
E2, Greg.
I'm going to split the difference, and I'm going to give it 4.5 fully functional torpedoes. I think, like you guys said, it's a great movie. It loses a half star for me just because of the historian in me knows what to nitpick. But I think anybody coming into this film who's not a submarine nerd like I am is going to enjoy it. So 4.5 torpedoes for me.
So a torpedo without the warhead.
Yeah, a dummy torpedo. A practice torpedo.
What you think is a torpedo, but it's actually Seaman Butters and a bunch of trash stuffed into a torpedo tube.
R.I.P. Seaman Butters.
Yeah, hell of a way to go. Anyway, let's see what Rotten Tomatoes says. This says 100% on the tomometer and a 79% audience score.
I'm going with the critic rating on this.
Yeah, same, honestly.
Yeah.
It's not to mention, it's not very often that the Rotten Tomato critics give a film 100%.
Yeah.
Although we've been led astray before because Rotten Tomatoes also gave Sansa Iwo Jima 100%, which
it's a good movie.
But it is a good movie and I enjoyed it. But let's get something straight. It's not a perfect movie. But so that has been our review of Run Silent, Run Deep. You know, Jack, I have to agree with you that you know we've started this new running joke where Jack texts me at the end of each film, and the last time was for The Horse Soldiers. He's like, why can't women understand that the male fantasy is just to go on a raid in the South to destroy the Confederacy and take home a war bride,
a Southern Belle war bride?
And this in this film, he's like, man, why can't women just understand that the male fantasy is to be on a submarine sinking Japanese ships around half-naked, muscular men.
And a crowded sub with half-naked, muscular men sinking Japanese ships in the Pacific.
The ideal male fantasy is going to sea with your bros and wreaking havoc against enemy shipping.
Yeah, right?
Yep. My response to him was like, why can't women understand that the male fantasy is being served glasses of gin while doing yard work? But
yeah, it's like the one role aside from Tokyo Rose for a woman in this film. Which, in their defense, there wasn't a lot of women at sea in the Navy during World War II.
Yeah, especially aboard submarines.
But hey, submarines are co-ed now.
They are.
That they are. We learned that in Periscope Down.
Down Periscope, you mean?
Down Periscope.
Down Periscope, Periscope Down, whatever.
Whatever, semantics. But one thing I was going to ask, what year was the Navy integrated?
Like Like
overall, or in submarines?
In submarines, because there's a black dude in this movie, and I didn't think that the Navy was integrated at this time.
Yeah, so during World War II, the Navy was integrated. The caveat to that was if you were a minority sailor and wanted sea time, the only ratings you were allowed to serve in were cook or mess attendant or steward. If you wanted to be anything else, you were limited to shore duty. So the Navy was integrated, but the opportunities for minorities, not the best.
Okay, so it was still somewhat functionally integrated. Or segregated is what I meant.
Yeah, it was functionally segregated. The steward, the rating of steward and mess attendant, and the whole kind of messman's branch since its inception in, I believe, 1893, has been kind of a way for the Navy to segregate itself without saying it's segregated. So there's a whole other conversation for us at some point, I guess.
it's segregation with extra steps.
Yeah, it's segregation without having any formal official policy of being segregated.
I see.
Well, on that cheery note, Greg, if there's anything that you would like to push, whether it's your own social media accounts or anything for the museums, the floor is yours. Have at it.
You can find me personally on at any social media, Twitter, Instagram, Tumblr, if you have one. I am DBF Enthusiast, and I just post random museum shenanigans generally, occasionally a snippet of history or something interesting that we found. And if you're ever in Philadelphia and you have an interest in naval ships, come see us at Independence Seaport Museum. We are open year-round, 7 days a week, so there's never a wrong time to come see us.
Sounds great. Like I said, eventually I'll work up the courage to actually go to Philadelphia to see those things, but the time has not yet come. And Jack, I believe it's my turn to choose our next film.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to make you an offer. Pre or post World War II?
Pre.
Let's do 2004's Troy, Director's Edition.
In like 4 hours.
Yeah, deal with it.
Yeah, okay, I deserved that. Okay.
You chose pre-World War II. That's what you get.
Yeah. Yeah, what would you have picked if I said post?
Post? That's a great question.
You didn't even have anything in mind, did you?
Oh, I probably would have chose, let me look here. Had you gone with post World War II, I would have done Olympus Has Fallen, starring Gerard Butler.
Okay, so I made the right choice. I'm sorry, I saw Olympus Has Fallen in theaters and I was not impressed.
I also saw it in theaters and I loved it.
It was so dumb. Like, you know me, I love dumb action movies, but Christ on a bike.
All right. Well, do you have anything else, Jack?
9.
All right. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review. The stars do matter. You can, if you're looking for additional content from us, you can find us on Instagram and Facebook at the Armchair Commanders Podcast. We also have a YouTube channel called History Apprentice. We have a Discord that is also under the Armchair Commanders Podcast name. We'd love to have you join us over there. Until next week, I've been John.
And I'm Jack.
And we will see you all later.
Bye.